I'll try to speak a little bit about the pandemics of the mind. And I think that this will be a view I put down of the year 2020, because I wouldn't be surprised in a few years, the views on that pandemic and what we have experienced or what we are experiencing will be to a very large extent completely different. I think there are some self-evident facts which are important. The first one, this is not the first time that human societies are experiencing an epidemic of such vast proportions. Here, I've listed a few of the ones which are most frequently mentioned. The huge number of people who have died, approximately 40% of the population of the world has been killed by plague epidemics over the years. Even now, every so often, there is this fright that plague may be spreading, and we have had several beginning epidemics in the last 15 or 20 years. Then there was the very large epidemic that we have seen with the, what was called the Spanish flu, which although it was not starting in Spain, has got that name because for political reasons. And it is a epidemic that at the time cost the life of many millions of people worldwide, and came back on 2 or 3 occasions, lasting for several years, and destroying much of what was left over after the First World War as well. And then there was also what was called the Russian flu. It was a epidemic that is less well described. It is one that started in St. Petersburg somewhere in 1898, and then it went and spread. And curiously enough, that disease has then reached England very quickly, probably because of the maritime connections. Many of the very well-known people from England at the time have been hit by it. For example, the Prime Minister, Lord Salisbury, has been the first one to suffer from it. Mr. Balfour, who has really got his fame by his rather inept handling of the question of the Palestine, has also been sick at that time, and a number of others. And the flu, I'm mentioning it because it has one feature which is more similar to the current COVID epidemic than any other disease, which is that after the acute disease, which lasted for several days, 10 to 15 days, there was what is called, there was a tail to the disease, which went on for several months. And very often this tail of the disease contains some neurological signs, mild paresis, sometimes problems with hearing, problems with seeing, problems with the sight of really sense of taste. And these neurological problems, as well as tiredness and exhaustion and uneasy feelings, have continued for weeks after the disease has happened. And what we are seeing now with the coronavirus epidemic is that there is a significant proportion of people who are not only experiencing the disease for a couple of weeks, but then after that have a sort of a tail. They've been called, I think in England, they've been called the long haulers, because their disease is lasting in much lesser form for quite a while. Then there was the variety of flus that have followed one another. One of them in particular has led the World Health Organization to speak of a pandemic, which fortunately didn't happen. That was another one that was also capturing the world. HIV/AIDS is another epidemic of our time. There are still some 18 million people who are suffering from that disease. 18 million people whose life now seems to have been saved, but who are nevertheless suffering and whose life has been significantly changed. I think I have a competition.
Everybody, please unmute except the speaker.
Right. Well, it's nice to know that somebody else is speaking. I think that another major set of epidemics, which we have almost forgotten because they were so frequent, has been the pest that has gone with malaria, which kept coming up in waves, and they were controlled, and then again there was a significant reduction of the attention given to the disease, with a new outbursts that have been described as the returning outbursts of malaria, something that we are now experiencing with COVID as well, because COVID is happening, and then there are strict rules, but as soon as the rules are a little bit loosened, the disease springs up back in the second, third, or whichever number of waves it will have. The typhoid epidemics have killed hundreds of thousands of people, particularly they've killed soldiers in wars, but also other people who didn't have access to water that was appropriately safe. And so I think there was a number of other diseases of this type that has been, tuberculosis is another one, a major epidemic that has been gradually. So this undoubtedly is one of the facts that we have to keep in mind. It's not the first time that we have a disease of that type of COVID present with us. It's not at all certain that we shall not have many more similar pandemics in the future. I'm just listing here one of the pandemic which is likely to happen with other viruses that are present in bats. There has been a very interesting paper that has described very recently the number of viruses which are present in the bat, but which are at present not spreading to humans. But the problem is that as we are deforesting and diminishing the surface covered by forests, and as towns are expanding their size, the bats which were previously living in forests are now entering into towns. And by coming into towns themselves, they also bring their diseases. And one of the set of diseases are due to the population of viruses which they have and which they are which they are spreading to human and might spread to human in the future as well in one or another form. But in addition to the catastrophes that may happen when a disease strikes humanity, there are other sources of catastrophe that are also not too far. I'm thinking of, for example, the first consequences of the global warming, in which our friends in Bangladesh will be particularly aware because of the consequences in terms of the raising sea levels and all the consequences that might have come with that. And then, of course, the human-made problems that are also present. We have been speaking about disasters, but this is really, humans are also very good makers of disasters. And the man-made disasters are threatening us because of the ever more powerful weapon and ever more weak feeling of how they should be controlled and what should be done with them. That's, I think, a second very important point about the COVID one. There are, however, differences in the current epidemic which make it really different from previous epidemics, and I think will also make them different from some future epidemics as well. Here is the first of these differences. The main problem of the COVID is not so much that it is a disease which strikes people, but it is a disease which adds itself to other problems which are already existing and kills. So that the epidemic of COVID will in fact hit people who have cardiovascular illness or cancer or other chronic conditions, diabetes, etc., and will contribute to the mortality of these people. It's one of the reasons that people are now using a term which is called syndemic rather than epidemic. Syndemic being the simultaneous presence of two or more diseases which are hitting the population at the same time and are reinforcing each other's negative effects. The term syndemic has been introduced in the 1990s, is gradually coming and used, and I think that the COVID-1 epidemic or pandemic is now a very good example of such a disease, where the main problem comes from the addition of the new disease to the previous ones, leading to a threshold which then is broken, and which leads to a significant number of problems. The second major difference that is there concerning the COVID compared with other diseases or other pandemics is that the world in which this disease is now happening is really a world that is different from the one it was in the past. Transfer of people and transport is more easy than ever before, and it's much faster than it was ever before. People worldwide are connected by internet, by television, by telephone. It is any news that happens any place is spread worldwide in no time at all. We are also now at a point where the population of the world has grown even further, reaching the level of approximately 8 billion people. 8 billion people would not be so bad if there wasn't 800 million people who are, in fact, extremely poor, living on less than $1 per, I think, for their existence of all needs per day. And I think that the number of these people is continuously growing, although the United Nations have proudly announced that their proportion has gone down, that they are not anymore 12 to 15%, but now only 10%. But the total number of them has gone up because the total number of the population, numbers of the population have also grown. I already mentioned the global warming, and one particular factor that I think is of enormous importance is that the last few decades have not seen anymore a continuous emphasis on the need for universal solidarity between people, solidarity between countries, solidarity between people in the same country, solidarity between people in the same family or across families, between different religions and between different places where they live. And I think that their lack of the of emphasis on universal solidarity, the absence of enforcing universal solidarity principles from school to any other, to legislation or to other activities of humans is one factor that is of particular importance. Another factor that is making this last epidemic of COVID so different from others is that it is a disease which is very likely going to create much more damage in the highly developed countries, in the rich countries, than in the poorer countries. Number one, because of the successes of medicine, something that Professor Ernest Grunberg many years ago has been calling the failures of our success. The fact that many of the people whom we have managed to maintain alive, despite of their illnesses, they are now present in much larger numbers, and the epidemic of COVID presents an acute, serious, major risk to their lives. And there are more of them in the countries which have managed to prolong their life and prolong their life expectancy. An interesting fact here, which I think is of great importance, is that while the life expectancy in most developed countries, highly industrialized countries, has significantly grown, the expectancy of disease and disability-free years has remained stable. That is, we have an increasingly large population which has disease and disability. And although they live longer, they are more vulnerable, they're more fragile, they're more likely to suffer from diseases such as those which come in addition, in a syndemic way, to hit them and then to cause damage to their life or kill them. Another reason that developed in industrialized countries are likely to suffer more is because the emphasis on democratic governance. I'm living now in Switzerland. It's a wonderful country. It has everything you can imagine. It is human rights are being enforced. We have in Switzerland a high standard of living, a very high minimum salary, very good health care, everything you want. Many, many good things. Switzerland is a small country. It is, I think, about a third of the size of New Delhi, about half of the size of Bangalore. But it has, with its 8 million people, it is divided into 26 cantons. And each of the cantons has a significant amount of independence. And each of the cantons has a number of municipalities. And each of the municipalities has an independence. They vote on everything that happens. So you have in Switzerland perhaps as much as 2 occasions to vote or elect per month. Now that's a lot of voting, but it also means that all decisions which are taken in a democratic way are not necessarily the same from one canton to another. So for example, in Geneva, which is one of the cantons, which has about 500,000 population, the rules are different from the canton that is next door, so that the hairdressers will have to be closed in the Geneva canton, but they are open next door, so that there is a continuous traffic. And the cantons are not in agreement about what they should be doing. But what is true on the level of Switzerland with its cantons and municipalities is also true at the level of Europe, so that the countries of Europe have different rules and enforce them at a different time. The skiing desert resorts are open in Switzerland but close in France. The food can be imported from Denmark into Germany but not into Poland. There's a variety of differences, and that makes it very much more difficult, because the fight against a disease is a battle which has to be led with a strategy that is common to all the elements, to all the forces that are being involved. And that, of course, is not the case when you have a huge amount of involvement and discussion and voting and democratic concerns that are present. Other reasons that make developed countries particularly vulnerable is that the international mobility of the population is very high, and of course also that the urbanization has been so fast and so rapid that the population density has been increased to a large extent. Not only, of course, in the highly developed countries, but also in others. For example, in Argentina, where now 95% of the population lives in towns on top of one another. And controlling a disease where people are so close and have to be so close to one another is, of course, particularly difficult. Now, in addition to all of this, there is also another dangerous and at the same time novel problem that is emerging worldwide. And that in addition to the syndemic, where these diseases try to rob you of your life, there is also an infodemic. That is the spread of information without any control, very often misleading you, very often being controversial or contradictory to one another. And this, there is no responsibility that is assigned to people who emit news or emit rules or emit other things which are contrary to what has been said before, which make people insecure which set of rules to follow, which makes them uncertain about what is in fact happening. And this infodemic, sometimes with malevolent views, sometimes with malevolent news, sometimes with idiots who are in fact joking and putting out information that is incorrect, is another major problem. And of course, the problem with this kind of infodemic is that if you were to try to control it, you would have to introduce measures of control which can be misused and can stop the freedom of speech, can stop the freedom of communication, and many other things which we consider as great advances in recent years. So that I think that another reason that is present, that these infodemics producers are very often people who have not a sense that they have a responsibility to other people, to the welfare of people in the world, and just emit those news as if this mattered not at all. So all of this makes this particular last pandemic different from others. It has created a number of problems, and you are aware, as well as I am, of the information about all this. We have seen that the psychological problems, for example, anxiety and depression, has been increased in numbers. There is numerous studies now, and these studies are confirming one after the other that in the population there is an increase, on one hand, of a feeling of unhappiness, of feeling of uncertainty, but also of depressive disorders and of anxiety disorders. The more central psychiatric disorders such as schizophrenia and manic depressive illness did not, for the moment, show any differences in their appearance. But certainly for the what one would call common mental disorders, they have shown a significant increase. This is in addition to bad feelings, bad mood, and feelings of unhappiness, and real concerns and worries that people have: what will happen tomorrow? What will happen with my life and with the life of my children? There is a Japanese problem which is called hikikomori. It is a syndrome that has been described in Japan first, in which a young person in general withdraw from the world. And they withdraw, and then they don't want any contact with anybody. This has been described now in Japan, but also in many other countries. And the clinical symptoms that are present in people who have withdrawn in this way are a variety. They have curious ideas. They have very often suicidal ideas. They also speak about themselves and see themselves in a very negative and diminishing way. And the same symptoms that have been present in those people who withdraw voluntarily to not have contact with anybody have also been described in large numbers in people who are forced to be separated from others by the rules of confinement, which are being present in many countries. Other health consequences of the COVID pandemic is the high mortality of people, much higher mortality of people who have chronic diseases than of the people who do not have them. And of course, somewhat surprising, but not very surprising, the higher mortality rate of people who have COVID as well as a mental disorder. Partly this is explicable by the fact that people with mental disorder are very often poor, very often without a stable lifestyle, very often without a family, very often without support from the community. But there may be something more than that, which leads to the increased mortality that is present in many, many studies that have been done recently. And then there are what is called remote health consequences. These are those that you don't see today. For example, they have been in many countries, they have stopped vaccination of children because they need them health staff to help the people who are sick. But the children who have not been vaccinated against some of the current diseases are very likely to be sick from diseases, not today, but in a few years' time, because they were not vaccinated on time. And the habit of vaccination is also broken. It's no longer normal. Yes, it's end of year number 1, I have to go and get the shots for 1, 2, and 3. There is no such thing anymore. And even if you go and look for somebody who will vaccinate your children, they say, we are too busy, we can't do it now. It's tragic that this is happening at a time when we are almost getting rid of some of the major problems. For example, despite of everything, in June of this year, WHO has announced that polio has been eradicated from Africa. It's only a small number of cases that are still present on the Southeast Asian part of the world, the continent. It would be a terrible thing if, because of the current efforts to deal with COVID, we stop the campaigns, we stop the effort to eradicate yet another disease. There is also other programs that have been stopped. For example, I'll give you just one of them, is the postponement of cancer detection programs, where people have been, for example, women have been invited, and many of them took the habit to have regular checkups to make sure that maybe they do not, so to be able to discover the presence of a cancer early in its development. These programs have in many countries been postponed or stopped until further notice, which means that those who will be not discovering their cancer early enough will in fact be discovered much later when this disease has progressed and when the treatment may be more difficult. Stop smoking programs have stopped in many countries. Emphasis on stopping alcohol and drug problems has stopped in many countries, although one of the constant findings worldwide is that the abuse of substances such as alcohol and drugs has increased in areas that have been hit by COVID. Many of the elderly people and people with chronic diseases have to go to get their care to a facility, and they have to take the public transport to get there. They have to wait to be seen. And all of this has been disturbed by the present disease control measures, which means that they are not controlling themselves regularly. And doctors don't come to their home because they're busy doing other things. And so many of these whose health's been kept at an acceptable level because of frequent controls and regular treatment have in fact been also now put at a particular danger to their life and to their quality of life. Now, doctors and nurses in all countries are complaining that the overcharging which they have with duties that have been produced by COVID has led them to an exhaustion, to what is called the burnout syndrome. Too many tasks, very often not enough recognition, no particular additional incentives, a very difficult situation. And these people, in fact, function less well, and treat less well. And so that the quality of care, despite of all goodwill, even where it is maintained, has been reduced in quality and quantity because of the exhaustion and the burnout syndromes among doctors and other health workers in the field. This is pure health consequences, but there is a number of psychosocial consequences as well. In many countries, there have been reports of intrafamiliar violence and problems within the family, not least particularly severe in the poor, because they live very often at an extremely restricted space of maybe 25 to 30 square meters, 25 square meters for a family of 5, which have to be in their house for all of the hours of the day, or most of the hours of the day and the night. And the chances that there will be friction, which grows sometimes to violence and problems and alcohol taking, God knows what, are very much higher. And this, I think, intrafamiliar violence is a phenomenon that has been present everywhere. The fact that it's intrafamiliar means that it is very likely due to the grouping of closing the doors and closing contacts with other people and making people survive at a very narrow and confined space. People are, of course, also terribly worried because of the expectations what will happen later. Many of them have lost jobs, and that worries them enormously. Reports from many countries in which agricultural workers are in fact being discharged with anything, without any help whatsoever, and travel home under difficult conditions, carrying disease with them, but also coming to home which they left because there wasn't enough money to sustain them there, is a major problem as well. And then is, of course, a number of professions which are likely to vanish. One of the people who has made most money on this time during the COVID has been the owners of the Amazon empire, where many more people than ever before are ordering things and gradually making shops useless, because it's so much easier to write it down and to get it sent to your home, rather than go and wait in some shop to be served or to travel for I don't know how long to do it. So that it is likely that salesmen, people who are servers in restaurants, and many other of these people are interested or working in transport industry, aeroplanes, for example, etc., will all lose their jobs. And what will happen with them is another story, which I think you can understand just as well as I do. But there are more subtle changes as well. For example, the working arrangements which we know, and which we say that if you have a boss who works with 5 or 6 or 7 people, he will try to find out who is feeling in what way, maybe say a nice word, or offer his help, or see by the expression of face that something is wrong, or be ready to see somebody unexpectedly. That has stopped as a method of work by a very large increase of the people who have working at their home alone. 2 problems there. Number one is, of course, that not everybody's home is suitable for working at home. But the other one is as well, working far from everybody else does not allow neither your colleagues nor your boss to be in the same relationship as they were before you were working separately. We have not yet learned how to organize teamwork, how to discover problems at work when people are working at a distance. Computers don't speak that language, the language of tears. It's something that we can see and learn if we are human, but we cannot see it from the machines. Of course, the economic consequences of have been described at length, and they are severe and multiple, and they will make us suffer for a long time, because the purchasing power of people has been reduced, because of the ways in which they're going to use their surroundings is different, so that the economic consequences in some instances will be catastrophic, in some instances they will be less so, and many countries have now taken on themselves to enter into huge debt in order to be able to support at least partially people who are hit by the disease in a more severe form. And then I wanted to mention one word that worries me at my age particularly, which is the digital divide. It's a word that has become popular now, which basically says you should do everything by using a computer. But if you have grown at the time when you spoke or used a pen, and if you have never used these computers sufficiently, you are not as familiar with them as the children in school nowadays who do it with so much ease, so much elegance. So you are suddenly deprived of all the developments that are amenable to those who competently handle the modern technology of communication. And it's not easy to learn it all. Some people do go for courses, but others don't. And they feel that they can manage somehow, but they can't. And so the digital divide, which is becoming much more important now as people are not any longer seeing each other, is of course another problem that is of major importance. And many of the social strategies of how we greeted people or how we said hello and how we made friends and how we read whether somebody is insulted, etc., have all been invalidated. That creates a major problem for us ourselves. We are not anymore certain. Have I left a good impression in this group? Can I come back to them? Do they like me? Do I like them? What is happening here? I'm sort of floating in cyberspace, but that's not life. It's floating in cyberspace, which should take a very small proportion of your life, not be the main form of your existence. A problem on a more political level is, of course, that with the infodemic and with the huge differences between scientists and political authorities and introduction of measures that have been done in order to save the economy rather than life, people are losing their confidence into scientific and political authorities. And how that can be established remains a problem that has not yet been tackled. But there are also silver linings of these black clouds which I am describing. First, I hope that the frantic search for this new vaccine, which is now being available, will in fact help us to discover other things about the nature of viruses and will not only create a vaccine, but will also open the doors to new scientific advances that will be very helpful. I think that what we have recorded and learned as failures in this particular dealing with this pandemic, this may help enormously to people who come after us and maybe even ourselves when the next disease strikes. And that I think is a gain in knowledge, expensive in terms of human life, expensive in terms of economic downfall, but useful nevertheless and very precious, which we should guard. Another glimmer of hope and the silver lining of the black cloud is the recent decision in Great Britain to start vaccination. And who has been selected first? The elderly, not who are sick, but elderly because of their age. Now, maybe this is not the right decision. Maybe they should be left behind. But the fact is that somebody started thinking, what is the ethical principle by which we are going to think not only about providing care for disease, but thinking about ways in which we are going to live with one another. It's an indicator of a change. And I hope that we can all participate in making this change take hold and become a very important central way of deciding on things. And then I also hope that this misery that has been experienced in many countries and all the losses that illnesses produced maybe reawaken our understanding, our clear understanding that societies can only survive if their members understand the importance of solidarity and promote it from day one, from a childhood, early childhood, to school, in all of the laws and in all other places. It is the only way for a society to survive is to have solidarity as a principle that governs its activities. Now, there are dimensions of solidarity. It is either open and includes everybody, or it can be closed. It may not be at all, this solidarity could be only for some people. Equally so, it can be depending on reciprocity. I go to give you something provided that I receive something. And this level of reciprocity may be different from one place to another. Now, if you look at this space that has been created by those two dimensions of solidarity, you can see that there are some, you can speak of generosity, that is giving to people without any reciprocity. It is good, but it is not the best. Receiving something and not doing anything for it is in fact diminishing you. And although you have this, you also gradually become dependent on generosity rather than being able to participate in generosity. In some instances, reciprocity is minimal, and you have some privileges, but they are all restricted to a very small number of people. It's a group that helps each other and refuses. So they have high levels of solidarity within the group and zero to the other groups, which are equally separated. A third type of solidarity is the one that is present in sects and factions, in which you have to be marked by a particular feature to be a member of that sect, in which case you will receive a lot and you will have to return a lot. And all these forms, I think, exist, but it's only the last one in which we are expecting that solidarity will be for everybody and that everybody must feel that it is a reciprocal affair, that I can help others and that others can help me, and that I'm obliged to help as well as I can expect that people will help me. And it's the constructive solidarity as a central remedy as well as a central pathway to a better future that we are seeing. So I think that the constructive solidarity means to accept that there are other people around us and that the survival of all of us depends on supporting one another. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think that I'm certain that it's unavoidable that the COVID syndemic will claim more victims and misery in the times to come. We are not yet there. I think when it finally abates, it will be so important that the humanity remembers every part and every mistake, every success that we had, and that it creates strategies which will enable us to meet new challenges in a more competent way. And that we should also remember that everything that is possible should be done to make the people of the world, including ourselves, to accept the notion that the survival of humanity depends on enhancing and maintaining constructive solidarity among people of the world, all of the people of the world, and use it to overcome this pandemic and to face our future with more confidence. I thank you for your attention.